Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's a live discussion on House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 2. I'm joined here, of course, by very special guests to talk about the second episode of House of the Dragon. First, Alyssa, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
And of Darrin, thanks for returning for another live discussion.
Oh yeah, really excited to keep talking House of the Dragon here. So awesome.
So I guess I don't know. I think this episode was another strong entry. I think it felt like an episode 2 because episode 2 usually, like the first episode, draws you in, introduces you to the world. The second episode usually sets the stage for the rest of the season. So it did feel like an episode 2, but I also thought it was a very strong one. It was a lot of things happen. I think they're cementing the political intrigue aspect of this show, and I think it's maybe even stronger than Game of Thrones sometimes, and that's going to be more the focus, and I think that they're kind of making that clear with this episode. And I think I like the pace. It's moving at a pretty brisk pace, which I'm pretty big of a fan of. So Alyssa, I guess we'll start with you. Your feelings on the episode overall?
Yeah, it was good. I moved the plot forward, it moved the story forward. It did its job as an episode 2. I would say that I liked the first episode better. I thought this episode could drag at times, but it was fine. It served its purpose. The thing that I was really excited about for this episode is that I just started rereading the section of Fire and Blood which this show covers because I hadn't read it in a few years and I just couldn't remember it. So just this past week I started rereading it and I'm ahead of where the show is currently. So I got to do something this week that I didn't get to do last week because I didn't really remember it, or I could really pay attention to how the book, or how the show rather, fills in the blanks from the book. Because I think we talked about last week, the text is really just this historical text that's written from the point of view of a maester. It's a history book, and there's a lot left out. Like, for example, the whole big birthing scene from last week, we saw what that looked like. That's one paragraph, and then the book just basically like she had a baby and the baby died, and that's pretty much all it is. So it's really interesting to see how the show is choosing to extrapolate from the text, and that was hit or miss for me. So the end of the episode, what we get at the end with Corlys going to Daemon and then Viserys rather, announcing his marriage to Alicent. Those are major beats from the book. Those are directly out of the book. But how we get there was kind of the show taking its own liberties, and that was a little hit and miss for me. It worked for me in some places, and other places I was like, what are they doing here? But I do agree with you, Mark, that I appreciate the brisk pace. They kind of have to, because there's a lot of years to cover.
Yes.
And I think, by the time, what did they say, 3 or 4 seasons? By the time we get to the end of it, we're going to have completely different characters because this is a generational thing.
Yeah.
So for this first part of the story here, I think that they do need to move at a brisk pace, and we're going to see some time jumps, as we saw here was 6-month time jump. But I think that all works really well. And overall, I do really like the choices that the show has made so far. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, I will say that I think I mentioned last week that I watched this video that explained the whole Dance of Dragons thing, and I started going. I don't have Fire and Blood, but I started going back and reading the section of World of Ice and Fire that had talked about this, and I haven't caught up to the show yet, though, so I haven't gotten very far. But yeah, so I know even broader strokes, like maybe not even as specific as you, Alyssa, because I haven't read Fire and Blood. But I know in broader strokes what's going to happen. It's really interesting to see how the show is choosing to portray it. But anyway, Darrin, your thoughts on the episode?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Again, I was expecting after last week. I was like, okay, let's dive into the next one. I do like the fact you're right. What you said about the pacing of moving forward. The time jump does allow things to have happened. We've seen the whole thing with the crab feeder has progressed. There's a lot more push from the council about remarriage, and the political infighting has sort of moved along. So it's nice that they can jump forward and just tell these encapsulated areas of like, this is when the big stuff happens. Um, and yeah, I agree with you with the political intrigue. I think that's really where this show's going to show its strength, and it's where things start to get interesting, especially because you have so many people with not just opposing viewpoints, but intertwined viewpoints. I mean, Damon is pushing against the crown, and yet he's also very defensive of it. You have Otto's doing his machinations on several ways around. You have Valeris or Corliss pushing on his end, and everyone's maneuvering in the small council and in the larger battlefields and political situations. So I enjoy when it gets into that. As usual, I thought the second half of the episode was a little stronger than the first, but like you said, it's your standard episode two. We set the placemat in the first, and now we're putting all the pieces that are going to play themselves out, down the road. So I'm again really looking forward to episode three.
Cool. And I also want to say hello to Brandon and Brentonberg in the chat. Thanks so much for joining. And anyone else who's watching live, thanks so much. Good to see you. Brenton says that it's interesting that Alyssa's reading the book again. Watching the show has left me wanting to reread it as well. Yeah. And maybe I'll buy that book eventually.
I'm just rereading the parts that this show covers. I'm not rereading the whole thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But,
yeah, just like I'm rereading the World of Ice and Fire part, or only the part that covers the book.
Yeah.
Or the show, I should say. I guess I want to talk really briefly about this intro because people were complaining last week that we didn't get an intro, kind of jumped right in. It was like, oh, why doesn't it have a huge intro like Game of Thrones? And some people were even pointing out, well, a lot of times shows nowadays won't do it for the first episode, but they'll introduce it in the second episode, which is what happened. And I heard a lot of different opinions on it. I don't have that strong of opinion on it either way, but I did find it jarring that they're using the exact same music of Game of Thrones. I don't know if I agree with that decision. I'm not upset over it. I don't really hate it. I just thought, well, maybe you should have went a different way. And maybe it's seeming a bit kind of cash grabby. Oh, remember that other thing? Watch this thing. I don't know. Darrin, do you have any feelings about the intro?
I think first watching it, I was like, oh, okay. And on my rewatch, I enjoyed it a little bit more. I get it. It's Game of Thrones. That's the thing people will respond to. And as a prequel, it's not like a totally different kind of tale. So I get where they're going from for that. And I mean, the opening sequence, again, art-wise is cool. We have obviously, everything is connected by blood is the theme as we move around that. And that's interesting. Not as cool as Game of Thrones, maybe because I really like the map and setting up where things are and putting things in relation and kind of showing what we're going to be dealing with in this episode or this season or something like that. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to catch lightning in a bottle twice. Do I have a problem with it? No, I'll still probably enjoy it. The next episode, be like, okay, Game of Thrones, I'm still going to listen to the theme. But on the other hand, I do kind of wish that they had gone a different direction. The feel of this show is different. It's a little darker. It's a little meatier. There's a little grungier even. I'm looking at you, Otto. You look like a bum. You look like a bum in fancy clothes. So I would have liked maybe something a little different with this, but whatever. It's Game of Thrones. We'll do that.
So last week, actually, we had a conversation about this. I remember Darrin and I, we were talking about that's fine to do the Game of Thrones theme, in the first episode, but they should come up with their own thing. And I was like, yeah, they really should come up with their own thing. But as soon as that theme song kicked in, I was like, oh, the Game of Thrones theme song. I missed this so much. And it, it invokes the feelings that I had hearing the Game of Thrones theme song when Game of Thrones was good, before the 7th and 8th season. So as much as I was saying, oh yeah, they should move on to something else, as soon as the first note hit, I was like, yes, and then I was sucked right back into it. And I don't know that it's so much of the cash grab because people are already watching the show. I don't think they're going to watch it just for the theme song. I think it's more like, there's no way we're going to outdo the previous theme song, so let's not even try. Let's just go ahead and reuse it because we'll never outdo it, and everybody's going to complain because it's nowhere near as good as a previous opening credit scene. And I also noticed that in certain places, I can't remember where, but sometimes you see it listed as Game of Thrones House of the Dragon, whereas before, I don't remember that before. I thought it was just House of the Dragon, but now I'm seeing they're throwing up a little Game of Thrones up top, like Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back type of thing. And they just want to make sure that you know that this is related to Game of Thrones. So maybe there is a little bit of cash grabby going in there too.
Yeah, maybe nostalgia baiting would be a better term, but I will say it was actually my reaction to it was kind of weird because I'm so used to hearing that music that I didn't even register at first. I was like, oh yeah, of course, the theme song. I was like, wait a second. Like, I'm not watching Game of Thrones. But yeah, I think the visual is very appropriate because Game of Thrones has the map because it's spanning all over the world and is showing you where everything is. But it seems like this show is going to be very focused on King's Landing, so I think it's appropriate just showing the blood flowing around King's Landing, maybe specific to this show. I kind of think the music should have been specific to this show too, but whatever.
Actually, I do have a question with that. Is that King's Landing, or is it the old Valyrian capital that they're going?
Oh, is it? Oh,
honestly, I was going to ask what you guys thought.
Well, the old Valyrian. Well, we did. It is confirmed that his model is the old Valyrian capital.
Yes,
that's why I was thinking.
Yeah, I took that as King's Landing, but I wasn't paying that close attention to it. So, it would to me make more sense for the opening to show King's Landing and not the Valyrian capital. But
sure, I was just the House of the Dragon. They were doing it. I didn't get a chance to like. Once I thought of that, let me go look again. So maybe next week we'll double check that. Check back here next week on Enchantment of Eternity. 6 o'clock.
It's only a model. Anyway. But
Bravo.
Maybe it was Dragonstone. Anyway, Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the episode proper. We get the introduction with quite sort of the visceral violence, sort of Game of Thrones style, seeing crabs eat people alive, and then we cut to Corlys Velaryon, and the small council trying to, portray this, this threat and how serious it is, and no one seems to be taking him seriously. And Viserys, I think we're getting signs of how he's a bad king. Personally, as how he's like, oh, we don't want to start war. What you're asking to do is start war with the free cities because this guy's backed by, the free cities, and we don't want to start a war. And Velaryon's like pointing out, no, it's not like. It's just some certain, rich forces in these cities. It's not the cities themselves, and we need to do something about it. And I actually very much side with him in this case. I think he's absolutely correct, and Viserys is being a bad king, and Otto Hightower doesn't give a fuck either because it doesn't have anything to do with his wealth. I don't know, Alyssa. Sorry, Darrin, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that was one thing they did really well in this episode was showing just what a crappy king Viserys is that he is just kind of disconnected. And yeah, you don't want to go start wars, but sometimes you do have to engage. And he's obviously wrapped around Otto's little finger for the most part, who knows how to play him. very well. So that was one thing I did appreciate with this is by the end I was like, we have an interesting kind of trio here between him, Rhaenyra, and Daemon. Rhaenyra is pretty much the one that's in the middle. Daemon is too aggressive and Viserys is too weak, and she's the only one that's really kind of looking and making some kind of strategic choices. So it's just an interesting way to set those pieces up of where everyone's sort of coming from.
Yeah, and I think we saw last week that he wasn't a good king, but this really expands on that. To be, the king of Westeros, to sit on the Iron Throne, I think we've seen enough Game of Thrones to see that you really have to know how to play the game. You really have to know how to be manipulative, and really no one we saw on the Iron Throne in Game of Thrones was that way either. But you had like your Tywin Lannister, who was in a lot of ways all but king in name. He was really kind of pulling the strings there. He knew how to play that game, how to play that political game. And you had your Littlefinger who knew how to play the game. And unfortunately, that's the kind of person you need to be in Westeros. Viserys is just kind of too nice and naive. And I think we'll probably see down the line that his poor decisions are going to lead to some not great things that are going to happen in Westeros. But yeah, I totally agree with you too, that I think that this was not a great decision on his part. And I think he makes a couple of not the best decisions in this episode.
And I kind of feel like Otto Hightower is kind of filling in the Tywin role, where he's the one who's sort of manipulating everything and has most of the power.
Yeah, and he's doing it for but he's not doing it at all for the kingdom. And I don't think Tywin Lannister was either, but he's doing it for his own purposes.
Yeah, and he has no interest in the shipping lanes or whatever. He doesn't give a fuck. Whereas Corlys Velaryon, to be fair, he has all of his wealth and all of his interests is tied up in that. So that's part of the reason why he is so upset about this.
Yeah, and I love how they brought, by the way, they brought this up last week, and it was kind of this throwaway scene that people weren't paying attention to, but I clocked it. I was like, okay, that's gonna mean something. Like it was kind of this sort of throwaway scene that if you blink, you miss it in the beginning of last week's episode, but it comes to pay off this week.
Yeah, I mean, even before I sort of familiarized myself with this story, I remember from my Game of Thrones days of reading about the Stepstones and how there was always pirates there and there was conflict there. So when it was mentioned last week, I did recognize it as well. Oh, the Stepstones, there's always pirates there. But yeah, and it was as soon as I showed it on the previous one, I was like, oh yeah, so we're gonna touch on that more this week. and I like how it's becoming a major. Turns out it looks like it's turning into a major plot point for at least the next couple episodes, which is it's pretty interesting. But I think that this also showing, because something that Velaryon touches on a bit more is not just this, is a lot of things with, part of it with Daemon taken up in Dragonstone, and which we'll touch on a bit more later, is just the whole kingdom's looking weak. And Viserys doesn't seem, he just dismisses that. It's like, whatever. And I think that's like, he's very foolish to do that. It shows how he is making the kingdom weak and not realizing it.
I love Brandon's comment here in the chat. Sorry, Viserys the procrastinator, first of his name. Very much. Well, yeah. I mean, again, he's a very detached king. If he's embroiled in his own grief and stuff, you might be able to get away with this. But this seems to really just be endemic of his approach to king. Is he's more worried about his placement among the council. And I think that's also the difference between, say, Otto and a Tywin Lannister. Is Otto is just taking care of what his interests in the court are over everything else. Tywin, at the very least, would make sure there's no trouble in the realm as he positions himself in court. Yeah.
What I really like is when Rhaenyra, that is how you say her name, right? Yeah. When
Rhaenyra?
Rhaenyra. Yeah,
Rhaenyra.
Yeah,
No
Rhaenyra.
S.
Gotcha. Yeah, so when Rhaenyra spoke up and was like, well, why don't we just send dragons down and fucking fry them all? Like, I was like, yeah, listen to her. Like, and I think it's actually showing that she would make a better leader than him. And I think this is kind of what it's leading to. But again, Otto Hightower did the dickhead. He wants to run things, so he doesn't like someone else pushing Viserys. So he's like, "Why don't you go pick a Kingsguard?" And kind of finds a way to dismiss her. But even then, she like shows some wisdom. And when all these knights come up and are like, "Oh, I've been in this tournament and that tournament," and she's like, "Well, haven't you actually been in actual combat?" And then she gets the guy that she kind of had the hots for in the last episode and be like, "Oh yeah, he has combat. He's a Kingsguard." And Otto Hightower tries to be like, "Oh, I don't think that's a good blah blah. You'll upset this other house." And she's like, "Nah, I'm the princess. Do what I say." He's like, "Okay." So again, I think it's showing her being a strong leader, and it's definitely setting up this character for something further down the line. Alyssa, any thoughts on this?
I love that the Rhaenyra spoke up in the council as well, and not only is Otto kind of a dick about it, but even Viserys is very kind of condescending, like, "Oh well, it doesn't work that way." He's not even listening to her.
Yeah,
he's not even like hear her out. Okay, maybe we don't just fry everybody, but maybe we go and like scare them with the dragons. Maybe that'll be good. Just he's not even willing to talk about it because like, oh no, you don't understand these things. But yeah, I love her taking command and taking control. She was one who I don't think really wanted to be in this position. But now that she is really making the best of it, and she's really out to prove herself, as we'll see a couple times more later in this episode. And I'm really digging this character more and more the more I see her.
Oh, yeah, totally. But it's also interesting to see how much, even though the end of last episode was like, didn't pay enough attention to you, and I wish I could change it, and you're gonna be the one because you understand. And she gets named the heir, and now 6 months later, she's still serving everyone's drinks and still getting kind of dismissed, despite the fact that she is listening and trying to contribute as much as her father might have believed in his support 6 months ago. Obviously, it's the forces of the everyday and the culture that are just pushing everyone back in their role, which prompts the big discussion between her and her aunt later on about, can you change the world? Will men allow it? Or is this an unmutable force? So yeah, I like how they established this. And like you said, still is the one making good suggestions here in the night bit, the only one asking who has combat experience. Maybe that's a good thing, and not like who your dad is. So yeah, and her willingness to push back against those that she can.
Yeah, I mean, there was an interesting contrast between her and Otto Hightower, because Otto Hightower is only concerned about the politics, like who's the powerful house, whose house do I want to please? Where she's like, no, who's going to be the best Kingsguard, who's actually going to protect us the best?
Well, and I think it also shows the person that in combat will make those required choices and not being like, like you said, worrying about the politics in the midst of a situation. So if later on you're up against an army and there's a dragon looking over you, are you going to be able to hold your ground, or are you going to slink away? That might be something worth knowing ahead of time.
And just want to point out in the chat, Brindenberg says Rhaenyra is right. If Aegon could conquer Westeros with 3 dragons, Viserys could leverage the fact that he has 10, so the free cities don't mess with him. Which is true, but he's like, "Oh, I don't want to start a war."
They may not like me if I do that.
And I think we get more of this Viserys in the next scene, that he just wants to please everyone. He doesn't want to be seen as a bad guy, so he goes to Corlys Velaryon and tries to like smooth things over because he didn't like the fact he left him ready to try to be like, "Oh, I still appreciate you." And this is where Valerian was speaking plainly. He's like, "Let me speak plainly, please, and let me talk about the situation." So I was thinking, oh, so he's going to come up with this great battle plan, this great war plan to defeat the crab feeder. But he's like, "Marry my daughter, marry my 12-year-old daughter," and then which leads to some awkward scenes, and I do appreciate. Viserys a bit more for the fact that he was like, she's 12. Like, I don't want to marry her. And it was such creepy vibes when she was like saying, "Oh, I can bear you great children," and she's like, "Well, your father told you to say this, right?" She's like, "Yeah." It's like, "What did your mother tell me?" "Well, your mother told me that I wouldn't have to bed you till I was 14. God damn it! And to be fair, I think Viserys had the same reaction, and when he brought it up with what's his face Strong later on, he's like, "Oh, the girl more mature. Don't worry about it." I mean, and then is true to medieval times, that they were more concerned about alliances and marriages, especially royal marriages, were always more about political alliances rather than love, or decency. um, but one of my favorite jokes is I saw one time where this guy was like, "Oh, my girlfriend asked me to treat her like a princess, so I married her off to the king to the prince of the France to form an alliance." But anyway, Alyssa, your thoughts on this whole Chorus Valerian scene?
Yeah, it was interesting that this is a choice that the show made that I don't think that this was in the book. The end game of this episode where Corlys goes to Daemon, that was there, but I think that's an interesting way to kind of connect those dots, as we'll see later when he gets spurned. I thought that added a lot to the story, because that he is, trying to legitimately build this alliance and also give himself a little more power by doing this. And I thought that was a really interesting choice by the show. I was intrigued by that. But yes, it did lead to some awkward scenes, especially since, I mean, I even thought like last week with Alicent was a little weird, and she's like 15, and they've aged Viserys up in the show. I think he's in like his early 20s in the book, so they've made him older, which makes things even more just really, really awkward and creepy. But the scene with him and whatever that Princess Lena or whatever her name is, walking through the garden and just showing the huge age difference. I mean, I think that really was effective in just showing how weird that pairing is, and how really they are putting, as you were saying, the alliances over anything else. How something like that, the people then just wouldn't bat an eye at, and people in our real history too wouldn't bat an eye at. It's like, well, no, we need to make this alliance. This is politically, this is a very wise thing to do. Never mind that this is an old dude and a 12-year-old, and that his daughter's stepmother would be 3 years younger than her, which is so weird. But they just don't even think about that stuff for these. It's all about the political alliances. But it was really, I think that was what they were trying to get across. It was really effective in doing that, and like just showing like how just weird that this is.
My only ew. That's it. That's my response to the whole ew. No, ew. But you're right, Alyssa. I think if their goal is, and I believe it probably was, to create as much discomfort in the audience and show the kind of extremes and how the courts manipulated who be used, especially because we have this whole sub theme this episode of the position of women in this society, and how they're really completely secondary. I don't think you can really underscore secondary as much as you can in showing an old man being wed off to a 12-year-old. so families can feel connected and powerful. Uh, yeah, so everything you all guys already said, and just adding the ew on top of it.
Mark, before we move
Yeah,
on to the
sure.
next
Go
topic,
ahead.
I'm going to throw in just a little kind of side note that's not related to the ooh, but it comes out of this conversation that they
Sure.
had. They're talking about this dragon who is missing, that no one's seen. It's one of the original dragons that Aegon conquered. I
Oh.
think one of his sister wives, I forget which one, rode this particular dragon that is could still be alive for all they know and has flown
What?
off somewhere to
So is
Essos.
it the sister wife who died in Dorne? Is that her dragon that's flown off and
I think
disappeared?
so.
Yeah.
I think so. I don't remember exactly. But
Mm.
they're talking about, and I seem to have some memory of this maybe being the dragon who lays the eggs that Daenerys ends up with. And I'm wondering if anyone had heard that too, or if I was just imagining that. And Brandon says Vagar is the name of the dragon.
Vagar, yeah.
Yeah, Brandon, do you know if that's the dragon who laid the eggs that Daenerys got? Because I think I remember hearing something somewhere about a dragon that.
But could that just be a theory that people have? Or?
Yeah, it would be a theory. I don't think it would be anything that would be like proven. But I think it might be something that would be a very strong theory that George R. R. Martin laid out there to suggest that that's likely what the case is. But I'm trying to remember. I may have read it somewhere in Fire and Blood, actually. I'm trying to remember.
Because I think, didn't those eggs come from a shy? So they could suggest that the dragon flew all the way out to a shy. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Brandon knows. Brandon seems to know.
They say he's got to look that up about the eggs. Well,
yeah.
But
anyway, this has nothing to do with anything, but it's something that came out of that conversation that they had that I was like, huh. But we can get back on track now.
Yeah, well, I was going to say about Corlys Valerian that I was like totally on board with him. And I was like, yeah, this guy at the start when he was warning about the stepson, I was like, yeah, this guy is good. Listen to him. But then when he did this bullshit, I was like, nah, fuck this guy. like this guy's a creep. So it's like the show, I think it doesn't want you to like any character. Once you start liking a character, it would be like, nah.
There are no Ned Starks in this show. Where Ned Stark was, well, that's probably for the best thing considering what happened to Ned Stark. But, or maybe a Jon Snow. Jon Snow would be another one, more pure and good. I don't know that we have anyone like that in this show, at least not amongst the small council and the older people, at the very least.
That might be the Sir Criston role that we get. As the kind of royal knight that will listen to the young princess and so on. They're definitely making some nice comparatives, I think, between Rhaenyra and Daenerys.
Yeah,
good way.
Definitely. Yeah,
as both were kind of pushing the edges and we're setting their own. Both want to create a new order when they come in.
Yeah, I think Viserys is kind of. I've heard him compared to Ned Stark, in the fact that he's naive and thinks everything's, wants everything to be good and not understanding the dark politics around everything.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right, so go ahead, Alyssa.
No, go ahead.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about this scene, which I think was a very powerful scene that maybe a lot of people were talking about with while Viserys is meeting with this 12-year-old girl. We see the queen who never was, Rhaenys. That's how you say her name?
Rhaenys, yeah.
Rhaenys talking to Rhaenyra and basically telling Rhaenyra that she's naive to think that she's ever going to be queen. And this, of course, has a lot to do with her point of view, is a lot to do with her experience, the fact that she was shunned being queen, even though she had the best claims because she was a woman. And so she has this much more cynical viewpoint saying like, they will never let, this realm will revolt before they ever let a woman sit on the Iron Throne, which might be a bit of little foreshadowing going on, but it seems like a very sort of wise viewpoint. Yet, Darrin, as you just pointed out, Rhaenyra's reaction is more like a Daenerys, like then I'll change it, then I'll make the change, and we do see from examples in this episode that she could be a great leader. So I thought this was a really powerful scene. Darrin, if you want to jump in first, if you had any thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about this is, they're both right in many of what they're saying. It's the old world versus the new world. It's the old order versus the new order. They're both sort of have legitimate statements in what she's doing, and I certainly think Rhaenys is jabbing because they didn't choose me, and I love Rhaenyra was just like, well, yeah, they didn't choose a female cream, they just didn't choose you. The jabs back and forth was very nice. Even the first one. When Rhaenyra has mentioned something like, if you're trying to get me mad, you're not succeeding. And the Queen's like, I think I am. Oh, quite the opposite, which means like, I know you're getting mad, but also her statement was something else that she was getting to. So the way they were able to kind of like double speak back and forth to each other, I thought was very right on with the way that court and that kind of political interplay goes off. But it also shows the strength of Rhaenyra that she is not afraid to play that game back and forth.
Yeah, I was getting very much I'm gonna break the wheel vibes from Rhaenyra there. Very similar kind of thing. But I actually I think I agree more with Rhaenys, and I didn't. I know that Rhaenyra interpreted it as, oh, she's just bitter because they didn't name her in particular. I took it as she's actually trying to impart some legitimate wisdom to her. Like, hey, this is the world we live in. They're never going to have a woman be king. They are going to be begging for the firstborn son to be a king. He's going to get remarried and he's going to have a son, very possibly. And people are going to want that boy to be king over you. And that's reality. That's the world that we live in. And I'm warning you of this now. That's kind of how I read it, that it was more of like trying to break the news of the harsh reality that they live in to this naive girl, more so than her having bitterness for her own self being spited. I mean, I'm sure there's a little of that too, but I really took it as, oh, you naive little thing, that this is the world that we live in. And I don't want to spoil anything, but we know by the time Daenerys is around that there hasn't been a queen of Westeros. So if you want to say who's kind of right here, I mean, I don't know. So yeah, that's kind of how I read it. And there may be a little bit of bitterness too, but I also think she was trying to help her, embrace her for what is coming, because this is the reality that they live in.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, I think it was a bit of a tough love moment. Oh, you sweet summer child. And I think she is right. I think Rhaenyra maybe is a bit young and naive and not realizing, and she's trying to impart this wisdom. And I do wonder if those words will sink into her, if she will think about that. So Brennan in the chat answers that the Pentoshi Magistrate Illyrio, how do you say it? Mapata, gave her 3 fossilized dragon eggs that came from the Shadowlands beyond the Shy. Yeah, we knew that part, but where did the Shy get them
I think that I read it either in World of Ice and Fire or Fire and Blood somewhere, that there was a theory out there that
okay, maybe it's a theory.
Some specific dragon was theorized to have laid those eggs, and I don't know if it was this one or not, but I don't remember. But it would just be a theory. But if George R. R. Martin is writing it, then it's highly suggested that could be the case. But I don't remember if it was this particular dragon or not.
I do remember hearing a theory about where those eggs came from, but maybe it was this dragon.
And then when I say theory, like a theory, like in the book, not like theory.
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and move over and talk about the whole power play with Damon and how he sent this whole took over Dragonstone, and like Viserys didn't even bother to to try to stop him, and then eventually he like announced that he's gonna marry, even though he already has a wife, and and that his wife was with child, which apparently was a lie. And Viserys wants to go and talk to him, but Otto Hightower is like, no, it's too dangerous. I'll do it. And so he goes there and, as expected, pretty much fucks up the whole thing and almost dies. At least he was smart enough when the dragon appeared to be like, sheathe your sword, you idiots. Like, at least he was smart enough to do that. But then Rhaenyra flies in and basically saves the day. And I like how when she gets off, she has that great entrance with the dragon. Again, reminds me a lot of Daenerys. And flies in and walks past the men. And the Otto Hightower tries to be like, oh, go back, go away, or keep the princess away. And she's like, oh, you probably shouldn't make any sudden moves toward me. My dragon's a bit protective of me. Like, that was absolutely great. And then goes up to Damon. And I think I've heard it said before, and I think it's true that she's probably the only one that Damon would actually listen to. And I think the scene is great. I love the scene so much, but I think it's great mostly because it shows the kind of relationship that they have. Because she points out, she's like, I'm your direct threat. I stole your succession from you. If you want it, go ahead and kill me right now. And he doesn't do it, instead gives her the egg. And I think it does show how much he actually does care about her, and that was great. I thought that was absolutely amazing. Alyssa, so let's start with you this time. What did you think of this whole thing?
Well, I like it from the Rhaenyra perspective. I love what they do with her and this character, or with her character in this scene. Everything that you said about her and the the remarks she makes about the dragon, and how she really just cuts through the bullshit with Daemon, and she's probably the only one who can do that. But from Daemon's perspective, this is where I was a little iffy on why the show went in this direction, because it seemed like they were just giving him something to do for this episode. I mean, he's basically just fucking with Viserys. It turns out that there's, his lover is not pregnant, and they're not really getting married, and so it seems really pointless to me. Like, he's just bored and he's just fucking with Viserys. And I don't know. And that is 100% a show choice there. And that was when I was like, I don't know. I didn't love that aspect of it. I love everything with Rhaenyra and her interactions with Daemon, but I guess I wish they had come up with something a little more relevant. When they first said that, that he had married. I'll just call her Misery. I think her real name is Miseria or something. But her nickname was Misery. When he had married her and was taking a dragon egg for the child that she was going to give, I was like, oh wow, they're really going off book on this. But it turns out no, he's just fucking with the king. It just seems really kind of silly to me. So I have real mixed feelings about this, because I do think overall was a good scene for Rhaenyra, and it was a great character development for her. I kind of wish they had come up with a better way to get there, in my opinion. I don't know. But it's like they just wanted something for Daemon to do until we get to the point where he may be heading off to the Stepstones in the next episode, it looks like. And they wanted, a way to incorporate him in this episode. So that is the one thing that, not my favorite thing of the show, but I did like the scene just because of how badass Rhaenyra was.
So Brandon, is it pronounced Mysaria? Mysaria? Mysaria, maybe.
Yeah, well, Brandon's spoiling the books, but she does get pregnant in the books, but he doesn't like take an egg and say he's marrying her. And I didn't know if she got pregnant this early or not.
No, it was later in the story.
Yeah, I think it's a little later in the timeline that she gets pregnant. So for him to marry her, get her pregnant, and take an egg at this point in the story is off book.
Yeah, it was just kind of a real interesting kind of bit of, yeah, because it's Damon mess poking at the king. It's almost like, look, I'm taking over this place. I'm doing do something, man. Do I have to like make up this whole big thing to get a giant reaction? And in fact, it's actually, of course, Rhaenyra that finds the real poke of the particular egg that he stole is the one that was intended for the heir prince who died,
Mm.
you know, and that, and that's the one that actually gets the king, in order to respond and send somebody out and make it a big deal. It's realizing, oh, he really is insulting me. It's like, dude, pay attention, come on. Give me some attention, please. Which is sort of what it feels like, especially since you find out, yeah, there's no wedding, the girl doesn't even know about this, what, and it's pregnant. It's a complete play for attention, as he sees it. And of course, you're right, sending Otto there is the worst. I mean, you're spending a fire and oil together and telling them, okay, now play nice. That's not ever going to happen. And Otto's a total dick, insulting and thrown off. I mean, for somebody that understands the ways of court, he's just, there is no negotiating with him. Um, and I did love the reveals of the dragons was definitely very cool. You had the one over the edge, which gets the people to hang down, and all I could see as they're heading up that causeway is like, you guys are all dead if anyone decides to stop you. The dragon would come down and just like decorate the whole little pathway. It's curved so it can catch the wind as it does it. Look all cool. And then we got the kind of shark reveal of Rhaenyra's dragon, which was awesome. So yeah, it's nice little bits. You even, I think, had some somewhat respectful interplay between Damon and Kristen, jabbing each other back and forth, but again, in a polite way, which is, I think, something that when we get to talking about the final scene, is an interesting way of looking at what is motivating Damon, because it's not just causing problems. He's not being a villain. He's not just jibing because he doesn't want to necessarily overthrow the king. He's still working within the system, and because you're right, he has that relationship with Rhaenyra that allows her to be able to speak with him when no one else can. It really makes the interplay and the power struggles interesting, because you can't get at what everyone's real motivation is. There's always several layers going on behind them.
And Alyssa, I think you might be right. I think maybe they just put this in there so they could give him something to do this episode. But personally, I felt it kind of fit in his character, or developed his character a bit more, that he would. I feel like he was just testing Viserys. He's kind of pissed at him at the moment. He's just pushing him, nagging him to see how far he can push him. And sending Otto Hightower to respond to it is like the dumbest thing to do. And he was definitely gonna respond to that. But then, thankfully Rhaenyra showed up to put him in this place. But Allison in the chat mentions the scene that takes place afterwards, where we see Myceria, if that's how you pronounce her name, being very upset over his shenanigan bullshits, and be like, look, I came to you for protection because I want to be safe, and this bullshit you're doing is putting my life in danger. And I think he's being reckless and isn't realizing how reckless that he's being.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting that she didn't know that he had told that lie until just then. She's like, "Wait, what? Excuse me? What is happening here? Wait." I just assumed that she was in on it, and so I found it interesting that she wasn't. And I thought the same thing, that was completely reckless of him to do that. That puts her in danger and kind of puts him in danger too. So that's just another reason why I didn't love this, to be perfectly honest with you. It's fine. It just wasn't my favorite choice the show has made. The show has mostly made really great choices, I think, when they have decided to go off book. This wasn't my favorite one, and that was really another reason why. But I thought that it was really cool to get a little more dialogue from her, little tiny bit more personality from her. And I think it was you, Mark, who mentioned this last week. How she reminds you of Shay, and very much, very much so, even more so. And like, is this Shay? So very, very similar.
They discipline, I think the scene underscores the fact that the women are the heroes of this show and the men are all kind of privileged dicks. Because I mean, Damon's whole thing, that's so childish. I'm gonna write that letter and say, I'm getting married and I'm having a kid. But I'm not even gonna tell the girl who's like, I'm sorry, what's going on here? We're getting married tomorrow. I wish I kind of knew that. And yes, her position of like, look, you're supposed to protect me. This is supposed to be here. I'm used to being handed around and owed, and there are certain decisions I've made to give me my own strength. You're not going to take that away. And again, we're still getting the position of women versus position of men now from a whole different perspective. So I think that's one thing this episode did very well. Clunky as it may sometimes be, I agree with you there, Alyssa. I think they're trying to underscore all of these positions before we move on to the next big chunk of this adventure.
Yeah, and this sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was reading the chat. But yeah, because in the chat they're talking about if there was ever a queen, and Brandon mentions that there was a queen in the Vale before the time of Aegon's conquest, which made me think that. And I've heard this recently. I've read it somewhere that apparently, like, it wasn't necessarily a precedent that only men could rule. But it became a precedent with the council that was shown at the start of the first episode. That was like setting the precedent, and it was going in for forward. It would stay to that, but it wasn't necessarily like. It just so happened that there wasn't a queen before, but it was never like set in stone. But it became set in stone kind of because of this.
It was definitely, though, a society that wouldn't necessarily, be amenable to that kind of thing happening, even if there wasn't a clear precedent until that Great Council. But I imagine there probably were not a lot of queens even prior to Aegon the Conqueror, but it's nice getting a little Westerosi history lesson from Brandon in the chat.
Yeah.
Really, the misogyny is real, folks.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't even had a female president in the United States, so I mean,
yeah. But the one last thing I wanted to mention about the scene with Mysteria before we move on is that I like how she points out, she's like, you're not in danger. They're a prince. They're not going to kill you, but I'm just a whore. They'll fry me alive, and she has a great point. And it comes to what you're saying, Darren, that this episode really is hitting the viewpoint of the women and how they're affected in this patriarchal society.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about Viserys's decision to marry. And of course, I kind of knew what was going to happen here because I, knew the story, and I knew that he wasn't going to marry Valerion's daughter, and I knew who he was going to marry. But it's just kind of funny the way that they planned it out. So I've announced I am going to wed. I will marry. And pause for like 10 seconds. It's really dragging it out.
Yeah, but you know what's a dead giveaway was? That Alicent was standing there. I'm like, if I didn't know already how this was going to turn out, I would have been like, what is she doing there? Like, didn't anyone else in that room like stop for a second and went, she doesn't usually join the small council meetings. I wonder why she's here. Did no one think about that?
Just wandering by. Hello. Stop in.
Stop in, like the small council,
And freaking smug faces, little smug face right there. Just don't you want to punch it? I mean, again, it's this of the 12-year-old, so you're kind of having to root this way, but
But this is kind of what I was thinking, because they kind of, from the discussions we got with Viserys and Alicent earlier in the episode, you got the impression that he liked talking to her. He was easy to talk to, but when he tried talking to uh, Corlius's daughter, that he couldn't really find any common ground. It felt awkward. It felt strange, and so he was more comfortable with her. And I feel like Viserys is kind of. And of course, this is just a show thing, but I think he was kind of influenced by the fact that Damon was willing to be like, well, fuck politics. I love this woman. She's the one I'm going to be with. And I think that was kind of rubbing off on him and kind of inspired him to go that same way. However, that's what he thinks, but really, Otto Hightower manipulated him into this situation. And then, of course, he's too feeble to realize it.
I think that's a great point, Mark. I think that I didn't even think about that he may have been, at least subconsciously, on some level influenced by Damon. You know, well, I'm going to marry the person that, I don't know if love is the proper word, but at least, enjoy being around. So, yeah. And I mean, I'm not a proponent for old dudes marrying 12-year-olds, but as from a political standpoint, all of his advisors were, I mean, that is the society they live in. That is just what they live in. That's their reality, that you do have to take those politics into account. And I think we're probably going to see down the line that this particular decision is not going to lead to great things. I don't know what would have turned out if he did end up marrying the 12-year-old, but I think this was definitely going with his heart and not with reason, was within their political system. And I think that is going to end up causing problems. And this is, again, going back to why I don't think he's necessarily the best king for this particular kingdom, for this particular system of politics that we have in Westeros. He's a good guy. I think he, out of all the characters on the show, especially the male characters, if they existed in real life, he'd probably be the one that I would most want to be around. But he is not a good king in Westeros for the Iron Throne. And I think that there are, I think it was you, Mark, who mentioned Ned Stark earlier, and I think there are some sort of Ned Stark similarities there, that he maybe is not making the best decision for the world of Song and Vice and Fire and Westerosi world.
Yeah, I have to agree. I didn't think about Damon kind of inspiring him. I like that thought that kind of pushes him to do it. And I have to say, I did like seeing Viserys happy. When he's talking with her and sharing a thing, it's like, man, this guy deserves to have a little kind of almost safe conversation of someone that he can just feel he can open up to, even though, of course, she's all guarded and, sent there by her gross dad. Now, I also obviously have to appreciate that apparently, was she informed of this before he said it, or was she surprised by this reveal of the king wanting to marry her? That's what it felt like to me. Like you said, I'm going to marry Sir Corlys. It's going to be this other person. I mean, it's very dickish, and obviously for Rhaenyra, that's kind of a big backstab. I mean, the whole thing, she's been very understanding kind of her position. She's doing the best as the heir and trying to learn. But he even said it to Alicent earlier on in the episode, is he didn't choose me, he spurned Daemon. Yes. That's a different approach. And of course, seems to be why she was treated 6 months later as just still being the cup girl. And sure, her desire, I want to see me more than just a little girl. She does this thing with Daemon, rides the dragon in, does do it without any loss of life, something that wouldn't have happened if Otto had gone just, was there by himself. We saw it about to blow up anyway. And in response, and even then she meets with her dad. They have that nice moment of like, you're sharing your thoughts of mom, and that's great. And look, I understand you got to remarry. It's part of the thing. It's the way that stuff goes. But maybe not my best friend. Maybe you don't want to surprise that on me. You said it early on. You don't tell Rhaenyra about her little conversations, do you? You know, it very much is again that who's Rhaenyra going to trust now? Who is she going to be able to turn to if she feels that she's been stabbed in the back by this and is going to be replaced by future kids? Even if she accepts that that's a reality, not a very cool way of doing it.
Yeah, I love how they have a little like kind of nod to each other right before he makes the decision. She kind of gives him the little approval, like, and he's like, "Oh, cool, yeah, Rhaenyra's all on board with this." I'm like, "Oh, by the way, I'm marrying your best friend." Did I forget to mention that? Sorry, I guess I forgot to mention the best friend. Yeah, no, as far as who Rhaenyra is going to turn to now, and this is not anything coming from the books or anything, but just based off of what we've seen on the show, I think the person she probably has the best connection to now is Daemon. So it'll be very interesting to see how that might play out moving forward, because you're right, she now has probably lost trust in her father and her best friend. So I'll be very interested to see how these relationships play out in the coming episodes.
Yeah, I love how I think the actress did a great job of this performance. I love how betrayed she looks. She felt like utterly betrayed by both of them. It was like, how could you possibly do this to me? And I do love how that she was giving the nod of approval, then he said the wrong thing. He's like, what? And so I think the way that played out was really powerful.
Well, Viserys is going to pay for it. Like you said, I mean, we see all of these pieces set up, obviously, as then we get into our final scene there with Corlys and Daemon, which honestly surprised me. I thought he was going to be meeting with the crab feeder, because we saw that face that had like half of the thing, but they're at Driftwood, which is, I guess, Corlys Valerian's seat place, his keep.
Yeah, I saw it on a map. It's like kind of east of Dragonstone. It's like in between Dragonstone and like the Stepstones. When you see it on a map, you're like, oh yeah, I can see why the Stepstones would be very important to him, because they're kind of like right in line to to Drift. There's Driftmark. I think it's Driftmark, right? Yeah, and then it's Dragonstone, and then the mainland Westeros.
Yeah, that was a really interesting scene. I like how Daemon was sort of like, he's like, look, I can talk shit about my brother as long as I want to. You can't though. like making it clear, like, and it's showing how it stands. But he was like, but I think overall, Valerian was trying to court Daemon, try to get him on his side to do what the king refused to do. It's like, look, you want to make a name for yourself? Let's help me deal with this shit going down right now.
And I think that's a perfect choice to do, because Daemon does need something to do. He needs to have some sort of claim, or he needs to have something behind him, something to add on to his name. And if he is like the scourge of the crab feeder, the defeater of the pirates of the Stepstones, coming back into court and dealing with things, he's going to have much more of a claim, and obviously it serves Corlys. So, but you're right. I loved that Daemon is still not disrespectful to the king, his brother, or the lineage, or the structure of anything. Again, he wants to mess with the system, but only within the system. And as someone in it, he feels that he's the only one that can. And I love the fact it reminds me of like the Bundys. It's like, look, we can beat each other up, but if anybody comes and threatens one of us, then we're all going to kill you. That's
and we talked about this last week, how Daemon is very loyal to his family, and he remains so even in this situation, both his niece and his brother. And I find that really interesting. It makes him a really much more interesting character.
Indeed.
Oh, and I wanted to. This is a little bit off. Well, it's definitely off topic, but I just noticed Brandon's comment in the chat about you brought up grayscale, and that reminded me of what do you guys think of the king's finger? Because I've heard a lot of like theories that that's grayscale because he had the weird thing on his back last week, and now he has this finger. And I saw a screenshot. I didn't catch this while I was watching it, but I saw a screenshot where he had a bandage on, but when he removed the bandage, it looks kind of grayscale-ish on his finger, and he's like holding in a bunch of maggots. Did you see that? Where the that's the Grand Maester, Mark's favorite people, the Maesters. That's their their cure is sticking your finger in a whole bunch of maggots. He definitely didn't have grayscale in the book, but I'm very curious to see where they are going with this. If it's going to be grayscale, for what is this all about?
I was thinking it wasn't just because it was in the books, but again, you never know. They could go in a different direction than the books. But if I don't know the history very well, but would this be like one of the first cases of grayscale? Maybe they just didn't know how to diagnose it.
Yeah, I don't remember either what the history of grayscale is.
The only reason I'd throw out is I didn't see any scaling. It looks like the skin is all dying. It's like he had a gaping wound that wouldn't heal on his back before, and now it looks like his finger. It looked like post frostbite on his thumb. It was all blackened and down. And yes, that is a way that you can actually, and it is medically useful, is you use maggots to eat away the dead skin because they won't eat the live skin. And thus it's actually a way to clean out the wound. Strange as it sounds. But yeah, just stick in your hand and just let those maggots go and we'll have a little chat about you marrying a 12-year-old. It'll be great. If you want to nail down a scene that shows the time, that's it right there. Hand in maggots to fix your hand while you're talking about marrying a 12-year-old. Yeah.
I'm just curious, even if it's not grayscale, I'm just curious overall with the thing on his back and now the finger, like where is this all leading?
Allison in the chat, I thought the finger injury was from cutting himself on the throne during the first episode. That is where he cut his finger. Nice, Allison.
But then why is it all black like that?
I think he's got either skin cancer and some sort of like degenerative infection.
Maybe
is going away.
Well, I've heard others comment that it's a thing throughout apparently the histories that bad kings tend to cut themselves on the Iron Throne War, and it's like a myth or a superstition that they like. For example, the Mad King apparently cut himself on the throne all the time. They so much so they called him King Scab. So they're saying it's like symbolism that he's fucking up, and the more he fucks up, the more he cuts himself on the throne.
I didn't see Joffrey get cut up though. That was Joffrey should have had cuts all over his body, if that's true.
Well, it's because he wasn't really the king.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, that certainly works, but I do find that interesting, is if it is just if he cuts himself or any wounds don't heal, if that's some sort of sign of degenerative disease. And sorry, my current medical knowledge does not stretch into that realm.
All right, so I think that about covers it, unless there's any other topics that we missed or anything else you want to touch on before we head off.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I was going to say, you bringing up the finger thing was the only thing that I wanted to go back on, and you got it. So,
all right.
Can't forget the finger thing.
All right, so I want to thank everyone in the chat for joining us. Brandon, Allison, Brenton, and everyone else. Thanks so much for joining. And anyone watching this in the archives, thanks so much for supporting the channel. And thank you, special guests, Alyssa and Darrin. Thanks so much for joining. And if you just want to give a brief word where people can find you and what you're up to, Darrin, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, you can find me pretty much all the Mondays here talking about House of the Dragon here with Mark and Alyssa. On Thursday nights, 6 o'clock Pacific, we have Mark over most weeks to be talking She-Hulk, Very excited about their show, enjoying it that much. And Corey Shoemaker will be joining us this week as a third. So should be a nice, fun one. I've heard some good stuff about this upcoming episode, so I am excited about that.
All right, Alyssa.
Hi, I'm Alyssa. You can find me on Alyssa Jean's Reviews. You can also find me here every Monday as well, talking about House of Dragon. But I'm over on my channel. I've got mostly Star Trek material happening. I'm reviewing Lower Decks every week, although my next Lower Decks review is going to be several days late because I'm going to be out of town. So it'll actually be released earlier in the day next Monday before I come on here. But other than that, it should be out usually on Thursdays. I've also got Star Trek top 10s where I do top 10s for different categories. Last month was romances and relationships, and this month upcoming, I'm going to do top 10 worst and best time travel episodes. So if you're into Star Trek, check it out. I also talk about my transition and my trans life and my HRT and all that stuff. So if you're interested in that topic, you can check me out as well. So come on over and join me, and I'll see you there.
All right, and if you're finding me for the first time, my name's Mark. My channel is Enchantment of Eternity. At the moment, I'm doing these live discussions on House of Dragon every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and also, as Darrin mentioned, talking She-Hulk over with him on his channel every Thursday night. Also, I'm going to be covering, like Alyssa, Lower Decks every week, and also we'll be covering Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. I believe that starts this week.
This week, yeah, this Friday.
Yeah. So we'll be covering that every week as well. And I also got a bunch of random Star Trek top 10s coming out in the next several months as well. So be sure to check me out for that. And thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Dracarys.